some logistics, some housekeeping, just in case you were not coming last term. Obviously, if you were coming in the first term, this is going to be repetitive. You heard this, you know this, but just for everyone who's new. The trainings are happening every Monday at 6 p.m. We always have a workshop and we have a spa debate that happens afterwards. I'm going to talk about the spa debates later for a bit. We use Zoom for both the workshops and the debates. We always post a link on Facebook and on Discord. On Discord, we also tag everyone who has the advanced member tag, so you should get a notification if you have it. So obviously, it's good to be on Discord. So if you are not there, why am I muted? Cool. Was I audible like the last minute?
Yeah, you only just mute stuff.
Just the host would like you to unmute. I'm the host. That's fine. Whatever. Yeah. So if you are not on the MDU Discord, join it. It's on the link here, or you can find the link. It's in the description of the Facebook event. There's a bot that is sometimes a little bit fucked up. It didn't assign you the role, but we also go through it and like manually do it. So if it doesn't do it automatically, we'll do it like within a couple hours manually. So go join the Discord. It's the easiest way to get the notifications through. The workshops are recorded, and both the slides and the recordings can be found in the database document. That database document is linked on Discord, so if you want to see any of the workshops that we did in the first term, you can go there and check it. Also, it's on the YouTube channel. We are going to be recording. We are recording this one as well. Obviously, this means that, for example, if you are asking any question, and you would be uncomfortable with that being potentially on YouTube, you can also contact me or contact Tom Husson, who's doing the uploads, and we can like cut it out if this is something that you would care about. Cool. Next is the sign-up form for the post-workshop debate. It's always posted in advance on Discord and on Facebook. It's always the same form, so the link is here. You can fill it in if you want to speak. We give you the option if you want to get speaks with your feedback or not. In terms of the capacity that we do have slightly bigger attendance than we used to have before. So there is not a guarantee that everyone who signs up will be able to speak every week. If we don't manage to place you 1 week, we are obviously going to try to do it next week. I'm going to be keeping track on who needs to be rotated, and we're going to try to make it as fair as possible. So just keep signing up, but don't get offended just in case we don't manage to find your place, because we want to make sure that the judging can always be high quality and the rules are good. So yeah, you can use that sign up form if you want to sign up. Then there are no requirements to join. Doesn't matter if you're from Manchester, not from Manchester. Your level also doesn't matter really. So we obviously don't do any background checks. So anyone is welcome. But obviously we have to make it clear that the workshops are meant to be advanced. So we do assume that you know the rules of BP. We do focus on more of long-term improvement. So in case that maybe you will want more of a basic introduction to BP, this is not the ideal workshop for you. But also you are still welcome to come along and listen. The last thing, if you do speak in debates, we do a system of private feedback trackers. So we basically make you like a private URL where we type the feedback for you in like a structured way for every week. We like it because it allows you to kind of see the feedback as it progresses. If you speak in the debate today and you haven't before, you're gonna get yours and you can see how it looks. Cool. This is all about the logistics. If there are any questions that people want to ask, I'm looking at the chat, so if there are any questions, I can answer them now. If not, then I would like the next slide. Cool. One more nice announcement. So this is Reese. You might have met Reese during first term when they were coming to sometimes do the exercises for us in breakout rooms, or they were speaking in the debates. This time, for this term, Reese is joining the team who is doing the trainings themselves. So you will see them actually delivering the workshops alongside with me. in terms of some info, Reese is an EUDC 2020 semi-finalist and one of the top speakers. They're an excellent judge. They CA'd something like every weekend since October, so they have a lot of experience with that. They do a long PhD in maths, and if you want to be friends with them, besides debating, they like to talk about Twilight and about Kardashians. So if you have any spicy takes, you can go and talk to them about that, because they will be really happy to hear it. So Reese is going to be delivering part of this workshop later on. So you will get to meet them more. Cool. We can go for the next one.
كنا نايمين في الصالون وانكسفت علينا الدار.
Just very quickly, the schedule, if you didn't see it yet. This week is the last one where we're going to be looking at, say, like the tactics of debating. Then from week 2 to 10, we're going to be looking at more topical stuff. So we're going to look at principles, law, art, 3 weeks of economics that hopefully we're going to manage not to make too boring and hopefully helpful. Sports, or like nice fluffy hypothetical technology weird stuff. So all of that should get covered. Hopefully includes most of the topics that people are currently scared of. So we will try to make them as approachable, accessible, that's the word, as possible. Yeah, so that's regarding the schedule. So I think this is all in terms of the logistical stuff. I'm pretty sure. Can check the next slide. Yeah, okay, cool. So if there's anything regarding logistics at all before we move on to the content of the workshop, now it's the time to ask. No? Okay, CL Debating Society is coming, great. Okay, cool. In which case, structure of this workshop. So what are we going to be covering today? So the workshop has a couple of parts. First, we're going to be talking about top half and back half strategy, explaining how it differs, what's the strategic goals that you have in each of those positions. Second, a couple of strategic tools that you can use. So how to one, predict clashes and burdens, or usually during prep, like also probably during the debate. Two, how you should explain your strategic implications. Three, how to spot weak spots of arguments to be able to well rebut them. And lastly, on weighing, a couple of tips on how to do it. And the very last thing we're going to do is we're going to do a case selection exercise. So we're going to divide you into breakout rooms, and we're going to let you practice what we hopefully going to explain to you within the next 40-30 minutes or so. Cool. Can I have next slide? Yeah. So first thing, then starting with the top half strategy and what are the strategic goals that you have if you draw OG or if you draw opening call. So I think in terms of the primary goals that you broadly have, there are twofold. I think the first one is that you are trying to make yourself as robust as possible and take as much of the sensible material as possible. The reason why the word sensible is involved is because it doesn't mean that you need to dump and say every single little thing that you can possibly think of on the motion, but you should, we don't want that. Cool, we want this, great. Okay. So you want to make sure that you think of as much of the good, sensible claims that can come up in the debate on your side and be able to run them well. So on top half, we want to run multiple arguments. You want to make sure that you have the sensible things covered. The second thing is you want to kind of survive till the end of the debate and stay relevant. This is the biggest fear that you kind of can have as a top half team, is that you're going to fall out, get kind of everyone rebuts you, everyone engages with you too much, and you end up being kind of forgotten at the end. Your case doesn't end up being relevant anymore. This is something that you want to prevent, so you want to adapt your strategy in a way that helps you being still relevant in the mind of the judge once the debate stops. So a couple of tips on how you should do this. I think the first one is that you want to be extremely careful to have multiple mechanisms and multiple layers for your argument. So if you were here last term, there is in week 2, Jacqueline did a presentation about how to structure arguments and how to make sure that you have those like multiple layers and mechanizations, how to do it well. If you haven't seen it, I recommend going. It's actually quite short, like 30 minutes. So if you watch it, I think that's a brilliant resource on how to do it well. So the reason why you want to have multiple mechanisms and multiple layers if you are in opening is because there's going to be multiple teams that are going to be rebutting those mechanisms and rebutting your arguments. Obviously, the more you have, the harder for them it is to take all of them down. So even if both O and CO manage to rebut nicely and persuasively, say 2 out of your 3-4 mechanisms, you are still relevant, you are still proving your impact, at least to some reasonable extent. So which is why you do want to have as robust arguments as possible. Second tip is that you want to take the most relevant characterization, and most of the arguments are going to end up depending on. So a trend that you can see with motions very often, the way they are said, is that even though they are technically deep in such that there are multiple arguments you can run on each side, they are often dependent on one piece of characterization that decides whether they are going to be relevant or not. If this sounds a bit abstract, for example, if you think of any social movement debate with prioritizing narrative X over a narrative Y, very often, even though there is a lot of arguments about like the impact of that narrative and engaging with that narrative, etc., all of this is usually dependent on just the characterization about which of these narratives is more believable. If you do that characterization in opening, nothing that your closing can run is not going to be independent on the characterization that you have already done. So if you are able to identify the characterization, do it in opening, you are going to just make your closing always dependent on you, no matter what they run, like how many mechanisms they bring. So that's the second tip. Third tip is clarity. If you are in opening, you want to make sure that the arguments you are bringing are brought in as clear fashion as possible. You want to make sure the judge is able to write it very clearly down and remember it. So if you in top half are a bit messy and like the judge can't really remember what exactly you were saying, and they have to go through their notes and like check for every single second little detail of what you said, it's going to become significantly harder for them to credit you in the way that you would want to. So especially in top half, you want to be extremely clear in what you are proving. Last thing in terms of the tips, you want to be explaining to the judge why you are on clash. So not only you want to be on clash, because the worst thing that can happen to you in OG is if all the other teams agree that you missed the debate and say that you are irrelevant. So you want to definitely be on clash, you want to be comparative, you want to be engaging with all the teams and with the debate, but you also want to explain to the judge why this is the case. So very often what you're going to see good speakers do, for example, at the start of PM, they're going to outline what the scope of the debate will be, and they're going to explain why the arguments fit into it. So they're going to do the characterization, they're going to say, look, the most important thing in the debate, the impact that is possible to reach in this debate, that is the most important one, is this is how we are going to do it, and then they prove those impacts. So you do want to do this and explain exactly why you are on clash to make sure that then the other teams can't explain why you are not, with some like smart framing. Similarly, for example, if you are dropping or deprioritizing an argument, you want to explain why you are doing it. So sometimes say you are OG and there are 2 arguments. One of them is really high impact, but like slightly less plausible. The second one is like one of those, low impact, but very plausible. Say you realize that you do not have time and the capacity to run both of them really well, so you have to pick one and deprioritize the other. You want to make it clear why you are making that strategic decision already. So the reason why you want to do it is because if you do not, usually your closing just going to take the one you deprioritize and explain why that's the more important one, right? Like if you take the high impact, they take the low impact, and they say, like top half was just really unrealistic. We're going to be the realistic ones. You're going to run the low impact one. That's like, but it's going to be plausible. If you run the low impact, they're going to take the high one, and they're going to say like, but top half missed like the most big thing, and like the big thing is so important, even if it's not the most likely. So again, if you want to prevent them being able to be the only ones who does that explanation by doing the explanation in top half, explaining this is why we think that this argument is going to be the most important one, and kind of preemptively weighing yourself against your bottom half. So this in terms of the tips how to stay relevant. A couple more things extraneously. If you are top half, a lot of things and a lot of your strategic decisions are going to depend on your predictions. So you want to make sure that you are paying attention on who you are likely going to want to beat in the debate and make your strategic choices based on that. It is especially relevant for, say, deputy speakers, for example, from the DLO. So an example of this, if you see that the other top half team, like opening government, is really, really good, or you are DPM and you see that both the opening opposition speakers are likely very, very good, you want to make sure that you are really rebuilding your material against them. You are really responding to all their cases, even taking them at their best, like making it very, very clear that you are beating them. If you think that the bottom half is going to be less good. If you are going against a top half team that's kind of weak and you think that you've already won, you can spend, let's say, the last 2 minutes burning through material that could be potential extensions for your closing and make sure that they can't run it. So this is something that is quite important in terms of how you should be using your time and what you should be prioritizing in terms of saying. The last thing is you want to take a POI from your diagonal and you want to think of it critically. So not always, but actually decently often, teams are willing to kind of hint at that extension, or they are hinting at like a really strong rebuttal they're going to run in their extension. So you want to be giving them a chance to give you that because you want to hear it, you want to be able to engage with closing because you don't always have a guarantee they're going to take you later on. But B, it can also just help you to strengthen your arguments. If they just like explain to you where the gap is, you can actually fix it. So you want to take the POI, you want to think of what it can mean, what it can lead to, and engage with it. Obviously, sometimes teams do like the baity stuff that they just ask you something really stupid, and they hope that you're going to spend a minute and a half trying to rebut something that's not going to happen. Obviously, again, you have to be critical and thinking, does this sound like a reasonable extension you're going to be running? If so, you probably want to be making some sort of preemptive moves to deal with it. Cool. Are there any questions about the top half? No? Cool. Let's do next slide. Nice. Okay. So in terms of back half strategy, that might be a little bit more complicated because there's already been 2 teams who spoke. Your opening likely did run some of the things that you prepped. So it's sometimes harder to make the strategic decisions and position yourself properly in order to win the debate. So a couple things on this. The first one is that you want to be picking an extension. The reason why you pick an extension you're going to run should be because that extension is going to be a winning extension. It shouldn't be because it's a new addition, a new extension. So what I mean by this is that very often a common mistake that teams make is that in prep, they sit down, they write down like 10 ideas they have about potential arguments, and then nice headlines. They have this like bucket list, then they sit in the debate, they listen to the top half says the headline, they are like, oh no, and they cross it off the bucket list, and they check what they have left. And then they run whichever 3 claims top half didn't touch on. The problem with that is that often they do it that they cross the thing just when they hear the headline, which means that you are not actually listening to how much your top half is proving, and you are less likely to be considering like vertical analytic extension, filling in the gaps in arguments. And B, sometimes you are not considering how to position those arguments at all. So like the only thing is that you're running 3 new things that top half didn't say, but there's less of consideration about are these things actually winning. And then the whip is trying to cook some reasons about why they are winning without the extension speaker considering it at all. So the mindset that you should have when you are deciding on extension is, why am I running it to win? Is it just not it's new? Because like it doesn't matter that it's new, like extension has to be new at least, but it always has to be also more important, it has to be winning. So like newness in and of itself doesn't really achieve much in the debate. Second advice, if there is a trade-off in terms of you running maybe fewer extensions, say 1 or 2 extensions, and really explaining their strategic importance, versus running a lot of them, say 5, because say your top half didn't say much and you have like 5 nice arguments and you can run all of them, you should always go for running fewer and making sure that you are really explaining why they are strategically important. Often if you decide to run 5 arguments, 3 of them are just not going to be relevant. They could be dropped. and the judge sometimes just might be like, I like all of these ideas, none of them are really proven, none of them are unclear why they actually matter. So you want to avoid it, you want to make sure that you are spending time on the few extensions where you think they are actually going to be important in the round. Next, you want to be, again, presenting the extension not a series of arguments. You want to present it as an idea about why you are winning. So I'm going to talk about the clarity of impositioning. I'm going to explain how exactly you can do that. But again, you don't want to just say, I'm going to be running these 4 ideas because they are new. You want to be exactly explaining why is it that these things are going to be doing in the debate? Why is it that these things are winning? So in terms of the clarity in positioning, I think there are a couple of things on how you should present your extension. The first one, and I notice this quite a lot, even with very good speakers, you should not be lying to the judge that you are saying something new when you are not. Most judges pay attention, and they did write the things that your top half said. So if you stand up and you say, top half didn't say anything on this, and we are going to be the first one who are going to be talking about it, but your top half already ran a lot of it, you are going to look stupid, and the judge is less likely to listen to you because you are already kind of making yourself sound less plausible. So instead, especially if you actually do have an extension, you do have some mechanisms, you do have something new, you want to be very clear and very honest about what you're doing. So very often, for example, we would stand in extension and we would say, look, we are going to be reaching the same impact as top half, like, I don't know, less gun violence in Mexico. We are going to be differing in the mechanisms that we are giving to reach that impact, and these mechanisms are going to be better for reason X, Y, Z. So again, it's better because the judge knows exactly what to expect, and you are not making yourself sound implausible at the very start by claiming you're going to be doing something that you are clearly not going to be doing. Second thing, you should be pointing the gap in top half very clearly at the start of the extension speech. The reason for this is because you both want to make space for the extension, explaining what is it by the spaces we are going to be filling, but B, you're getting the attention of the judge. This is especially true if you are running vertical extensions, because sometimes if it's going to sound somewhat similar, the judge might just lose the attention. You'll be like, I've heard this, I probably don't have to listen as carefully. If you stand up and you say exactly what you are going to be filling before you start actually going into your argumentation, the judge will know what to expect, they will know why you are going to be relevant, assuming you are going to be proving the things you claim you're going to be proving, and they're going to be actually paying attention to you. So this is the reason why you should do it. Like very often, if you listen to good extension speeches, they will start their speech by saying something like, look, the problem with the top half is X, or like what our opening missed is Y. So this is a good way to be able to position your extension at the start. Obviously, the whips are going to be probably going into more detail, explaining exactly how the extension is positioned, but you want to do it at the start of the extension as well to get the attention of the judge. You can do it in a couple of ways. For example, you can point out the mechanistic gaps that the opening has. You can explain limitation that impacts. So for example, you can point out, look, they claimed this really big impact, they gave a bunch of mechanisms for it. Here are reasons why they are unlikely to reach that big impact that they claimed just by those mechanisms. And then either you can give the actual better mechanisms and reach the impact for them, or you can run a different argument, a different impact, and kind of outweigh them just by being more plausible or better. Thirdly, if your opening close to top half, you can point out exactly why your opening close to the top half, just say opening opposition had this really good response, and then explain how you are going to fix it. And run the analysis that your opening missed, the reason why your opening close to the top half, and fill that gap in. So this is in terms of how you should be positioning your extension and the sort of considerations you should have when you are picking it. And advice in the unlucky situation when your top half is just good and they happen to take everything you read. So I think the first one, and sometimes people ask, like, what should I have done in the bottom half? Like, my opening was really good. How could if I won it? Sometimes the answer is you couldn't have won it, or it would be unwise to try to win it. Sometimes it's actually a good strategy, especially if obviously not if it's like a final and like it matters if you win, it doesn't matter otherwise. But in most other cases, it is better to take a second than take a fourth. So sometimes you want to take the strategy of like riding your opening to second. So for example, you can find distinct mechanisms of the impacts that your opening is already proven, delivering them, focusing on a lot of rebuttal on the opposite bench, and then kind of explain why your bench as a whole beats the other, and make it very clear to the judge that your mechanisms are distinct. So maybe they are not more important than your openings, but they are distinct. So even you by yourselves are still beating opposition bench with distinct mechanisms from your opening. So you are not derivative. You are maybe less important in your opening, but you are still enough to beat the op bench, both of you. The even less lucky situation, which is, say you are CG, your opening is losing to OO, but also they just set everything that you prepped. So that's a very unlucky situation. I think the way that you can still try to turn it in your favor is if you do not have your own positive material anymore, you can look and think of what are the reasons why my opening is losing. So what did OO say that has beaten my opening? And then try to deal with that material, try to rebut that material. Very often you kind of find a way how to flip it into substantive, or you can just present that rebuttal as the reason why you're beating your opening. So just saying, look, opening couldn't deal with that, we are going to deal with that, the strongest material of opening opposition, and then take it as a result of that. Cool. So are there any questions regarding the back half? No? Good. Cool. So yeah, so the last one for me is in terms of predicting clashes and predicting burdens. So I'm not going to go into massive detail into this. And if you want to, there is a workshop from week 3 that is called Prep Time Efficiency. And we do quite a lot of detail for that, where we go through motion and we like really go into how to find the contention, how to predict it. So if you want to see it in detail, go and watch that workshop. It's like an hour long. It goes into a lot of detail. But in terms of in short, I think the common mistakes that people make when it comes to them predicting clashes and burdens in a debate, especially in prep time, is that they kind of sit down and they start generating their own arguments in vacuum. So you sit with your partner and you think of like the 5 nice things you could say for your side of the motion. The problem with that is that if you do this, you often generate nice claims, but these claims are unlikely to get contested, or they are unlikely to just be comparative. So for example, say in motions that are about, I don't know, putting women into positions of power, sometimes teams do like a really nice analysis about why it's really good for women to be equal and have a lot of power, but no one's contesting it. Everyone's contesting the mechanizations that are done to achieve that goal. So in that situation, you wanna make sure that you want to avoid this by asking yourself always when you are prepping whether your arguments are comparative, asking, is this likely to get contested? Is this something that the opposite side is going to just agree with? In which case you don't have to spend time on it. Find where the contentions actually are. I'm going to explain after how to do that. Before that, there's a question that's about the bottom half. So how to take a strategic second if your opening is winning and has taken all the matzah without something repetitive? Does running a negative case help? Yeah. So again, you definitely do want to do a lot of rebuttal in that case. You will always have the closing team that your opening couldn't have responded to. So assuming that they said something, you will always have at least, like, hopefully a lot of rebuttal to be able to run to them. Again, I do think that usually you should be able to brainstorm at least some little additions to your opening in terms of mechanisms. So obviously you might not come up with a completely different argument. Your opening was very good, but you can come up with some little mechanization that you can add to the ones that they already did. Once you do it, you can tell the judge, look, we have this additional mechanization to our opening. You don't have to weigh it why it's more important. You just say, look, we do have it, we have something new, and did all this rebuttal to the opposition bench. This is why our bench as a whole is beating the opposite bench. And then usually the way the judge judges it is that they're going to agree, like, you've beaten the opposite bench, you do have something new, less important than your opening, but like in and of itself it's this thing, so we take a second. So obviously, yes, running a lot of rebuttal and like trying to flip the opposite bench always helps. It's definitely the strategy you probably want to be taking. Cool. I hope that helps. So in coming back to the clashes embedded, so the second thing to say in terms of common mistakes is that sometimes teams just bite off more than they can chew. So they think of some really nice sounding big impact, and they don't consider whether they can actually prove it. So obviously there are sometimes motions where you think, but like this could technically lead to like a civil war or something. That would be really impactful. Again, you should be considering if this is a burden you can actually meet, or if it would require you to have far more than 14 minutes to be able to effectively prove it. So consider not just the strongest potential arguments, but always ask yourself, am I able to meet those burdens? Am I able to actually generate the material and deliver the material that I need for the judge to find that plausible? Last thing then on how to do that prediction. So again, the one unfortunate thing is, like a lot of it just comes with practice, a lot of it comes with building intuition. So it's just true that the more debates you're going to be doing, the more you're going to see sort of repetitive themes of motions, and you are going to start recognizing those are like the common clashes that often happen. I think the reason why it's still quite useful to say this is that you can try to be as conscious of this as possible. So when you get the motion after the debate, like think of what were the clashes. Is this like if you've like encounter a motion that's very similar, think of, is there a pattern? Is this something that I can try to apply to more motions? And if you are prepping motions with yourself, just for practice, again, you can think about these things, try to build that intuition quicker and quicker. If you do not have that intuitive, immediate idea of clashes, if you don't, sometimes you just look at motion and you're like, there's going to be these three things and three clashes. Sometimes you don't. So in the case that you are kind of more stuck, I think the helpful extra step you can do is to consider the other side's main claims and identify where the contention could be. So I say main claims, which the reason why I'm saying this is you shouldn't be constructing the entire case of the opposition bench. That's obviously not going to be helpful, but you can think of the main claims they are likely to make. And then you can identify, is there a way I can flip it? Where is the contention going to be? So 3 examples, this is not exhaustive, but I think a lot, like, it is reasonably helpful in kind of outlining what these can be, how contentions can look like. So for example, in prep, I realized that both Goff and Opp are likely to agree about how the motion plays out in 2 different contexts. So we both agree that this is a motion that's going to be really good in developed world. We both agree that this motion is probably going to be really bad in developing world. So in that situation, the contention and the disagreement is likely going to be on framing, explaining which of these contexts is this motion more likely to be enacted and where the scale of the impacts is going to be bigger. So if you are the team that wants to enact it, you want to explain why it's more likely to happen in the developed world, why the positive impacts in the developed world are so much bigger than the potential harmful impacts in the developing world, why it is like somehow weighed against each other. So that's the first example. Second example, in case that both Goff and Opp agree on a desirable impact. So I've already touched on this, but often it's motions that talk about improving the situation of women, improving the situation of minorities. So assuming you are in a good debate, both sides agree that this is something they want. So the disagreement then is whether the mechanism is effective or harmful. So for example, the motion that was at Euros some 4 years ago, sponsoring female-only tech companies. Again, both sides are probably going to agree we like women in power. So the disagreement is going to be, is the funding of female-only tech companies the correct mechanism that you want to use to achieve that impact that we both agree is desirable. So then the convention is going to have that really rigorous mechanistic analysis explaining why the impact you both want is going to / not going to occur, it's going to get worse. The third one is when Gov and Op disagree on which of the impacts are more desirable. So, for example, social movements motions are sometimes a good example of that, where one side wants to argue that they would want to have mass mobilization, really big movements, really inclusive, when the other side wants to say, no, we'd rather have smaller but like very committed group of people. So both sides already disagree on which of those impacts they want. They maybe agree on whether the policy is going to lead to them or not, but they disagree on which of these impacts is a good thing fundamentally. So then the convention is going to be weighing off between the importance of those impacts and explaining which one is better than the other. So those are broadly 3 conventions that can happen. If you identify it, you can then spend your prep time focusing specifically on winning on that convention, which is exactly the thing that you want to do, because everything else, if it's agreed on, it's not going to win you the debate. Cool. So that's on the clashes and guidance, and all for me for now. So if there's any questions right now, I can answer. Cool. If not, then I'm going to give it over to Rishi.
Yeah. So I'm going to assume that everyone can hear me. And we're going to move on to the first of the issues I want to talk about to you about, which is explaining the strategic implications of what it is you're doing within a debate. So that is explaining to the judges not just the thing you are doing, but why it is you are doing that thing. I'm going to start by giving what I would consider the main piece of advice on explaining strategic implications in the words of Shia LaBeouf. You just should do it. That is, I think lots of teams in rounds have an idea in their head of why it is they're making a particular argument, a particular piece of rebuttal, or a particular characterization, but at no point do they say to the judge that that is the reason they are doing that thing. That is, they leave that as something that is implicit, and it's something that never gets explained. One of 2 things often ends up then happening. A, another team gets up and manages to co-opt that piece of argumentation or the end impact of that argumentation to mean something else within the round by offering an alternative explanation of what it is that it means. And therefore, they're able to essentially take away all of the advantage of the useful piece of argumentation that you had just done. Or secondly, and more unfortunately rather, the judge just doesn't have the same conception of the debate or the impact of the piece of material as you do, and therefore doesn't give you the credit that you were hoping to get from that material at the end of the round. Often, I think this is one of the most common ways that teams get angry about calls, because they think that they've done everything they needed to win the round, but at no point have they explained to the judges why those things were necessary and sufficient for them to win. And that actually means that explaining the strategic implications of what it is you are doing within the round is useful argumentative content, both because judges are imperfect and therefore actually explaining to them what it is that you are doing within the round is useful, but also because the act of explaining it in and of itself is actually an argument that pertains to the outcomes of that round. Remaining on this, now I want to talk about how it is you actually do this process. That is how you explain strategic implications within the round. A couple of things I want to say here. First, I think the most common mistake that teams make when they first attempt to explain the strategic implications of their material is they drop phrases into the round that are essentially just assertions that don't have much context. So the most common example of this is, for example, a team will make an argument in the round, and when they want to explain why it is that argument is something that's going to win them the round or they think is important, they're just going to, at the end of the argument, say, this argument is going to win the round because it's going to have the biggest impact, with no further explanation. As a judge, this is often quite frustrating because what's going to happen next is the next team is going to stand up and they're going to make an argument and they're going to say, this argument is going to win the round because it has the biggest impact. And you're going to go through the debate. All the teams are going to say that and give you no reasons why it is more valid when they say it than when anyone else says it. And at the end of the round, that means all of these assertions have essentially had no outcome on the judging discussion because you have no way of weighing between them. Rather, when you're going to explain the strategic implications of something you're doing, you're going to have to make A, clear very precisely what those implications are. We'll see what that means in an example in a second. But B, you're often going to have to make arguments to the judges about why it is what you've done means something in the round. That is, correctly explaining strategic implications means that you should be explaining how it is the argument, rebuttal, or characterization that you just did affects how other teams' cases are going to interact with yours, and subsequently what that means for the position of your team with respect to those other teams. I think this is best seen through an example. So I'm going to give an example that came up at Euros this year. So round 3 of Euros this year was the motion you see at the bottom of the screen, which was "This House opposes the commercialization of mindfulness." Unfortunately, this was a motion that empirically didn't turn out to be super balanced. It was very helpful to draw opening opposition on this motion, which I indeed managed to do. I was speaking in Deputy Leader of Opposition, and one of the things we realized during prep time and during the debate is that something that government teams are going to want to do is make the claim that the kind of mindfulness you get when it comes to the commercial platforms is going to be ineffective. And so just to clarify, this motion did have an info slide that defines what mindfulness is. So that's kind of a series of practices, including things like meditation and so on, tagged to, for example, various positive mental health outcomes that largely in the commercial space today is pushed through apps like, for example, Headspace, like Calm. One of the things then we expect Gov to be doing in this round to try to be winning is to claim that when you get commercialized mindfulness, that's going to be ineffective. And that's therefore something in opposition you're definitely going to want to be pushing back on. Something I do in my speech in order to attempt this is try to explain why it is that when mindfulness wants to break into the Western market, it needs to have some kind of hook to get it in, because it's based on traditions that often aren't given much credit to people in the kind of Western sphere. And so what I explain in characterization is that the apps that want to break into these markets need some way to be able to advertise themselves. And the best way they can do that is by framing themselves via respectable means, i.e. via psychology or via neuroscience, as being effective. So what their CEOs want to do is they want to go and hire researchers who are going to do research that shows that these apps are effective. And therefore, that means that the apps that are breaking in, that are having the best adverts, are ones that have scientific evidence that they're effective. Now, I could have stopped the argument to some extent there. The complete argument has been made that these apps have some evidence behind them that they're effective. I think that's not completely using the extent of this argumentation in the round. Rather, what I do further to this, that is explaining the strategic implication of this argument, is as follows. I then say, what this means for government teams in the round is if they ever want to make the claim that the kind of things we're talking about are the ineffective versions of mindfulness, then these claims are going to drop out of the debate. And the reason is, if that were true, they would not be able to gather this scientific evidence, and therefore they would not be able to have these successful advertisements, and therefore they would not be the apps we're talking about in the first place. And then when closing government in that round get up and make an argument that is based on the claim that these kinds of mindfulness techniques are likely to be ineffective, they ultimately end up dropping out of the round, exactly because I've already explained what it is that argument I've made is going to do throughout the remainder of the round. And so the end outcome of this slide is when you make an argument, you should have an additional layer of argumentation that doesn't just explain to the judges that you've made the argument and that you think it has a big impact, but rather why it is the impact that that argument has is going to affect other teams in the round and what they're going to have to do to beat you. Before I move on, I'm going to pause to see if there are any questions on explaining strategic implications. You can type those in the Zoom chat. As an aside, I also always have the Zoom chat open on my left monitor, so even while I'm talking, you can always be typing questions and I will see them there. Okay, so Chris has a less serious question, but if anyone has a serious question for me, I'd be happy to answer that. Otherwise, I'm going to talk next about spotting weaknesses in argumentation made by other teams that you're going to be able to exploit. Actually, before that, we do have a question. How do you determine which things to do this on? So that is, how do I determine which things I should explain the strategic implications of? Right, so I agree you don't have time to do it for every contribution. Broadly, though, your case will have cohesive goals. That is, in every round, something you should be discussing in prep or before you give your extension is what your path to victory is. That is, how is it you intend to win the round? Rather than just trying to drop as many arguments as possible and hoping it's going to be the case that one of them sticks, you should have an understanding of what the argument that you most expect to be able to win the round is and how you're going to do that. So, for example, in the mindfulness round, the broad strategy on opposition is to say these apps or whatever you get are somewhat useful, and commercialization means that lots of people are going to get access to them. And that means that I know to prioritize any claim that's going in rebuttal that's going to harm that core goal. Equally, I want to spend time explaining to the judges that that's the way I'm going to try to win, and explaining, therefore, that the strategic implication of that strategy is that in order to beat me, government teams are going to have to prove that A, the mindfulness they get on their side is effective, and B, that lots of people get access to it. And so really, if the goal is to decide what to prioritize in terms of strategic explanation, you should be prioritizing the things that are most core to your path to victory. There's a second question, which is how much time would you dedicate to this as either member of government or member of opposition? That depends a lot on the speech and how much you're going to have to do to beat top half. In general, though, I think it is always worth dedicating a decent chunk of time to this. So actually, lots of what Lucy says already pertain on member of government and member of opposition already pertains to explaining strategic implications. That is, the section of the speech at the start that Lucy says you should do about explaining the gaps in top half that you're going to be filling is actually just preemptively explaining the strategic implications of the material that you're about to be doing. So as member of government or member of opposition, you're actually always doing this at the start of your speech. And therefore, it actually takes up a significant amount of time in the average MG or MO speech, at least at the top level. If there are no other questions, I'm going to move on to talk about spotting the weak points in arguments. So that is, the other side is given an argument, and you want to try to generate efficient rebuttal to that argument, not just as many lines of rebuttal as possible, but the ones that are most likely to take out that argument without taking up too much of your time. I'm going to give 3 points of advice to this, and then we're going to have an exercise where I'm going to ask you to post some of the weaknesses of this argument that you see on screen in the Zoom chat. First, though, those 3 points of advice. The first one is that when you're trying to spot the weak points of arguments, the best way to approach this is to try to think from the mindset of the judge. That is, if you were judging this round, which part of the other team's arguments would still leave you in doubt? There's 2 comments to make about this. One, obviously, this means that you're going to spot weak points of arguments better if you have more experience in judging. Actually, for strategy in general, judging experience is useful. And if you don't have much of it, and, for example, want to become a better speaker, I recommend trying to get it. Secondly, though, I want to give some common examples of what things you're likely to find here. So I'm going to suggest 2. One, and I think by far the most common, is that the arguments that the other teams make have a burden in them that they haven't proved. That is, that in order to believe that argument, there is something that that team had to have proved, and they didn't prove it. So we're going to see examples later. I'll clarify this when they come up. But in particular, the comment I want to make about this one is that one mistake that teams make, even if they spot this, is that they just point out that that gap exists, and then they don't offer any reasons why that gap is hard to fill. And a team later in the debate just fills that gap, and the rebuttal was ultimately useless. Rather, in this situation, what you ought to be doing is pointing out that that gap exists, and then giving some reasons why it is implausible that that team could fill that gap, i.e. why that burden is false. The second common example of a gap in an argument or a weak point that I think occurs is that the claim that is made in a certain point of an argument is just intuitively very implausible. They might have given some reasons why in kind of debate land that claim is true, but the claim itself, when you hear it, feels at least as if the average layperson on the street would find that thing deeply, deeply implausible that it is true. The reason that means that this is a weak point of the argument is that means that if you can come up with reasons why that thing isn't true, it is likely that the judge is going to find those arguments intuitively convincing. And so this is a good point to be able to efficiently attack that argument also. The second piece of advice I want to give you on finding weak points of arguments is that British parliamentary debating is in actuality a game where arguments are for the most part repetitive. That is, there are very common themes in rounds, and often you want to be proving very similar things, at least as sub-burdens of arguments. What that means is that you will often see teams repeating the same argument structures, or at least the same patterns of arguments between rounds. If you pay attention to these, and in particular think about what it is you do when proving that argument yourself, you'll be able to spot the gaps quicker because you have a template in mind to compare to. That means it's A, useful if you want to spot weak points of arguments to do more debating. I guess that's unsurprising. But B, useful when you're thinking about arguments outside of debates to try to think not just about what you would say to prove them, but what the burdens you need to prove are, so that you can better spot by checking against that checklist when it is that other teams don't prove those burdens. Finally, to help you do this, if maybe you're a debater who struggles to some extent to do that for yourself and would want some guidance, listen to the OAs judges give you, even, and I think especially, about other teams within the rooms. Something good judges will be doing in their OAs is summarizing what the other teams have done and then giving reasons why that argument, where it wasn't believed, wasn't something that the judges found plausible, i.e. they will be pointing to the weak points of arguments of other teams, especially if they were exploited. That means if you're listening to OAs about other teams, so OA means oral adjudication. It's the thing that happens at the end of the round to justify why it is that the result that you've got happened. So for example, if you're from America or in the region, it might be referred to as an RFD instead, as a different acronym. Sorry, so you should listen to OAs, even about other teams, because the judge is going to give you exactly the set of weak points that you wanted to have spotted. And that's going to explain to you how then in the future, given that these arguments are often repetitive, you can better exploit those weaknesses. Having said those three things, I'm going to pause quickly to see if there's any more questions about spotting weak points of arguments before we go on to an exercise. Okay, if not, if you're still typing, please keep doing so, and we'll, in the meantime, get started with the exercise, and maybe I'll come to those questions at the end of the exercise if there are some. So in this exercise, we're going to talk about an OG argument on the following motion. This House, as the feminist movement, would promote narratives about the importance of relying on and supporting other women, e.g. sisterhood, as opposed to emphasizing self-reliance. What I want to assume is that you're in op bench on this motion, and Opening Government have made the following argument. We are going to include these narratives in campaigns, popular media, such as films and books. And what's going to happen is that once women hear these narratives, they're likely to find them inspiring. And that means they're going to become more involved in the feminist movement. And they're going to do things like act more in solidarity with women around them, for example, in their workplaces. So that's the argument OG has made. What I would like to do is try to spot as many of the weak points that are quite serious in this argument as we can. I'm going to give us some time to do this. And then what I'd like you to do is post them in the Zoom chat. And in a second, we'll reconvene and discuss the reasons that you've come up with. In the meantime, of course, if you have any questions, you can also post those in the Zoom chat too. And I will answer those once this exercise is over. Answers in the Zoom chat. So for people, I guess, who want to give me some answers. And honestly, I've also had one just typed out to everyone. Or is this is a question, actually? So I'll come to the question from James in a second, and I'll just go through the answers I've had typed out to me first. So the series of answers, some weaknesses with this argument that were typed out to me were, firstly, it is unclear that the feminist movement, which is the actor in this debate, even has the power to do any of the things that Opening Government are going to say they're going to do. So this part of the argument has already failed that plausibility check that we talked about earlier in the judge's mind. Secondly, even if we get this published, it's unclear why women are going to believe, identify, or even hear these narratives in the first place. That is, in this second line, when Opening Government just say that women find them inspiring, it's really unclear why that is, given that I really don't even know in this argument what the narratives are. Thirdly, let me scroll a bit. You had another one. I'm trying to order them. So the next question is, it's unclear, even if they find them inspiring, why they join the feminist movement because of that. There's another mechanization gap here. Finally, even if all of the previous things are true, it's unclear why they would act more in solidarity, i.e., why does this belief even translate into action, even when they join the feminist movement in the first place? Let me keep scrolling. Yeah, and I think a lot of people, yeah, so I think that covers everything, except there's one more that I would add that I don't think anyone messaged me, but I think is important to note as another example that arguments often fail as a weak point. This argument is also uncomparative. That is, no one explains to me in this argument why it is that I get any of these outcomes in a sense that is more than why I would get them if I were to instead emphasize the narrative of self-reliance, because this is a motion that has two inherent sides to it. One needs to explain not just why the narrative on one side is good, but rather why it is better than the narrative on the other side. Having said that, there was a question. Let me try to scroll up to that question and let me read it. Yeah, so the question, many times the weak points of a team are not the most important points of their case. How can I give them relevance if to their case if their team could be 99% complete without this point? Is it not more strategic to try to destroy the stronger points of that team or to weigh analysis of your team against their strong points? So this is, I think, a good question and essentially just a good point. One of the things to say about being strategic is that if you spot weak points of arguments, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should spend lots of time attacking them. Rather, the first question you should always ask when providing rebuttal is this an argument that I actually need to beat in rebuttal to win, or is it something that is irrelevant to the round? If it's something that's irrelevant to the round, then at most, I think you want to be arguing to the judges why it's irrelevant to the round, or even just trusting them to tell that it is irrelevant to the round, depending on how irrelevant, how clearly irrelevant it is. If you are going so far as to provide rebuttal, that's going to be taking up time in your speech. And therefore, the strategic thing to do is to only be trying to spot the weak points and do rebuttal if that argument is something that is ultimately something you need to beat within the round. If there are no other questions, we're going to move on now to the final exercise for this workshop. Oh, no, never mind. Sorry, I forget a slide. Next, finally, in a workshop on strategy and weighing, we're going to talk about weighing, probably unsurprising. Before I talk about anything on this slide, I just want to point out that actually lots of stuff that we've talked about so far does factor into the act of weighing. That is, all of the strategic stuff about pointing out gaps in other teams' arguments, about mitigating them, and so on, is a prerequisite to weighing. Because the thing you often want to weigh against is the end outcome of the argument that the other team has proven. And that means that actually, before you even do this process of weighing, you've already done lots of the other stuff we've talked about. What I want to do on this slide instead then is first give you, if this is something that you struggle with to do in the first place, some of the common metrics that teams might use to try to weigh their arguments highly in BP debating. And then we're going to talk about what to do if lots of teams in the room are going to be using these metrics. So what are the common metrics that teams use to weigh their arguments in BP debating? The first four fall into the category I would call consequential. That is, that they speak purely about the outcomes of the argument. That is, the first three I think are fairly clear. One, the number of people that are affected by your argument. So obviously, if your argument affects more people, it's likely to be more important. Two, the intensity of the harm done to each individual person. So if there is a greater intensity of harm or of benefit from your argument, it's likely to be more important. Thirdly, the likelihood of the outcome that you report comes from your argument, i.e., what is the probability that the thing you're talking about actually happens? Again, obviously, the higher probability that the outcome you're pointing to happens, the more important your argument is going to become. And fourthly, I think the one that's slightly more subtle, and I want to explain a little more carefully, the availability of alternatives to achieve the same outcome. The reason this matters is it speaks to the marginal change in the motion. That is, if the motion achieves positive outcome X, whilst also doing the set of what harms Y, and there are lots of other ways to achieve the benefit X that doesn't also come with lots of the harms Y, then the fact that the motion isn't the unique way to achieve X is really harmful for the government teams in that motion. because opposition teams can either counterplot the other claims or can argue why the other claims are likely to be ways that, say, the state will implement to solve this issue. And that means the marginal change in the motion isn't the benefit X versus the harms Y, but rather is we get the benefit X likely anyway and still have to deal on government bench with the harms Y. Equally, if the motion is unique, often there are ways to offset the harms Y. And that means you can do the converse of what it is I just said. Following on from these common metrics, there are two others that I think get used a lot, which are that you owe a special duty to a particular actor in the debate, and therefore you ought to prioritize the benefits, or rather not harming, that particular actor, or that the actors within the debate may not have consented to the harms that might accrue to them, whilst other actors may have consented to those harms, and therefore the harms that accrue to them are less important. The thing I want to say about both of these is that these are examples of kind of principled claims within the debates. If that's something that is scary to you or you find confusing, we have some principled workshops coming up in the next 2 weeks. We're going to talk a lot more about these kinds of claims. What I want to do to finish off this slide then is talk about what happens if the motion is balanced, both sides are good, and they've at least suggested, therefore, some metric for weighing why it is their claim is important. I'm not going to deal with these last two examples here, because as I say, these are principled examples. We're going to talk in some detail about them and other such principled claims in the next 2 weeks. Rather, I just want to deal with the consequential part of the debate. So that's these first 4 reasons. So I've got a useful graph that lots of you might have seen before for doing that. If you need to weigh between these 4 things, then the useful thing to know is that these are actually all shortcuts to the same claim. That is, in a debate that is what I would call consequentialist, the question is about maximizing the area under this graph. So that is, you want to have the largest impact with the highest probability. So intuitively, if you look at this graph, where on the left we see the size of the impact, which speaks to the first, second, and fourth of these metrics. And on the bottom, we have the probability of impact, which is the third one. The better argument here is going to be the one that has kind of the largest rectangle in area, i.e. the golden argument rather than the purple one. That means that when weighing between them, what you want to be trying to do is balance the factors of how probable the argument is in order to reach its benefits versus the various factors that weigh into the size of impacts. What that's going to require you to do is to recognize that the other teams have some of these metrics in their favor and try to mitigate the extent to which they're able to reach the size of their metric whilst increasing the extent to which you reach your own and weigh between them. In particular, often, just because an argument has a high size of impact if it occurs doesn't mean that it's winning. And I think that's one of the largest mistakes that happens here, is that teams reach for vastly improbable but high impact arguments, try to weigh them as winning because if they connect, they are high impact, but ultimately they are improbable and therefore lose, i.e. this purple argument is not the winning one within the round. Before I go on, there is a question here, which is, how can I weigh the lack of consent of an actor against big utilitarian impacts? So there's an example here. I'm going to say that this is a question we're not going to answer today because this is, as I said, ultimately a principled question at its core. It's going to take a long time to answer that question, but fortunately we've scheduled several hours of workshops coming up in which we're going to be talking about these kinds of themes. So this is something that I won't answer now, but we will answer soon. Otherwise, if there are no more questions, I'd like to move on to the final exercise. Lucy, I hope you prepared breakout rooms and some people to run this. Is that the case?
Yeah, so there will be, I'm going to just check it once more. There's going to be 6 breakout rooms. I'm going to read who's going to be running which after you do the explanations.
Okay, cool. So what you're going to see in this exercise, so I can't actually see the motion on my screen because of the Zoom bar, which is kind of unfortunate, and I can't get rid of that. I will do my best to remember it, but I might be making some mistakes because it's hidden from me on my screen, thanks Zoom. So the motion we're going to be discussing is that is this House regrets the modern left. Lucy, could you read the motion for me? I really can't remember the exact wording. And Zoom is not helping me.
This house regrets the increasing trend of the modern life characterizing conservative politicians and voters as morally reprehensible.
Thanks, Lucy. I'm sorry for the tech problems, everyone. So this is actually a motion from Trinity IV this weekend, where Lucy and I actually happen to be CG. What we're going to be doing in this workshop is, in this exercise rather, is we're going to be sending you into breakout rooms where we're going to ask you to come up with cases, but in particular, what we want the focus to be on isn't just coming up with as many cases as possible, but rather coming up with the case that would be winning given this top half debate. So one of the things that you're going to be doing, rather than just coming up with arguments, is also coming up with the strategic reasons why it is they're beating top half, with reference to the things that we've said earlier about spotting weaknesses, about weighing, about back half strategy, and so on. So in this room, I'm going to go through quickly what the top half teams do. I'm going to add some detail to what's on the slide. One of the skills you need in back half is obviously knowing what top half have said. And so if you want, I would suggest you might want to take some notes on what it is I'm about to say, because it's going to add a little bit of detail to what's on the slides. Starting with opening government. From opening government, you get two broad headline claims. One, that on the counterfactual, i.e. when this demonization or this calling these voters morally reprehensible doesn't happen, you see less demonization of conservative groups. And that means that it's more likely that, for example, conservative politicians are going to cooperate with the left on policies that are in common interest and therefore reach solution-oriented policies that are good for everyone. Secondly, you're going to see more voter mobilization for two reasons. Firstly, on opposition bench, it's really hard to flip conservative voters to vote for you on the left because they're just going to see you as their enemy and therefore they're going to be unwilling to vote for you, even if that's something that could be in their self-interest. Secondly, though, you're going to get more engagement in politics in general because people are turned off from politics by the perception of mudslinging, i.e. that you're not discussing policy, but rather you're just attacking each other on the grounds of moral character and just essentially calling each other names. Out of opening opposition, you get four things. Firstly, there are two pieces of rebuttal. One, the claim that even on the Gov side of the motion, the Conservatives are still going to be engaging in similar behavior. That is, they're still going to be calling voters on the left morally reprehensible or other similar slurs, and therefore not much will change. Two, that Conservative voters are unlikely to change their mind anyway because they voted Conservative for essentially all of their life, and it's unclear just because why the left changes this behavior that they change their voting patterns. They then give two positive arguments as to why you're going to get more voter mobilization on opposition side. One, that you get more efficient criticism and mobilization for protests because you're able to rally people around the behavior of conservatives who are, for example, particularly reprehensible by just calling out their behavior, and that's something that people respond to more. Secondly, that shame is actually a useful way to make people take better actions. That is, if you can call them morally reprehensible and make them feel like the public believes that they are such, then the shame of that is likely to mean that they change their behavior because they don't want to feel that shame. So that's what you're going to get from the top half. As I said, your goal is to work out what extension you'd like to run in closing government, and in particular, why it's going to be beating the two teams in top half. Hopefully that's clear. Lucy, do you want to go ahead and read out the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I will do that. Just give me a sec. I'm also going to do one more thing. I'm going to send you in the chat. There should be a link where you can open this screenshot of this, because I think once you go to breakout rooms, you're not going to see the presentation anymore. So you can refer back to the arguments that we just read out. Cool. In which case, there should be, I'm gonna check the numbers. There should be 6 breakout rooms. The first one is we always assign one person that is somewhat in charge of the breakout room, so they're able to make sure that everyone gets to speak. And they can do the presentation of the answers afterwards, so no one has to feel awkward. So we have one of them being run by Trinu, second one being run by Yusuf, third one by Dan, fourth one by Chris, fifth one by Tom, and sixth one by Shak. And so I'm going to open the rooms now, and you can go for how long? 10 minutes? 10-ish minutes. People who are running the breakout rooms, if you have any
hear maybe from all of the groups. So I'm sure all of you had great ideas. I'm sorry that we won't have time to discuss all of them because obviously we've got lots and lots of people in this Zoom call. If we tried to hear from everyone, that would take us a long time. And I'm sure lots of you have already been in this workshop for a while. So instead, we're just going to hear from a couple of the groups. I'm going to start with, let's see, so Chris, your group. Chris, are you here?
Yes.
Yeah, so Chris, what kind of things were your group talking about?
First of all, we think that characterization is very important in the debate and something the top half needs to do more of. So in terms of vote clashes, first of all, whether conservative voters are likely to react negatively and say use the enemy, or whether they're going to, essentially respond to the shame. And like we think that it's important to characterize here, like who's going to be exercising this shaming, how it's going to be done. Whether it's going to be politicians, voters, for example, things like media, and exactly use this characterization to show how they're likely to respond. And secondly, also like to characterize like how the right exists in a range and essentially show that the likely response is going to differ and basically try to frame the debate down to moderates and make it clear why the polarization argument falls on our side rather than theirs, basically. And secondly, some more impacting about the benefits of being able to like get policy idea from both sides, because you're essentially like limiting the range of like policies you're able to adopt if you're like shaming half of them, are the main things we discussed.
Okay, so that sounds good to me. So broadly, to just kind of highlight what the strategic direction I think Chris's room has taken is. So the first thing on how voters reacting is, as far as the information we've given you goes at least, identifying an unsettled top half clash. It's likely that in the room that you were in, you could actually have more of an idea as to which team was winning that clash and make a decision as a result. But it's really good that already we're seeing that that is an unsettled top half clash and one that we can therefore settle in order to try to flip that debate, in particular by adding nuance to various of the characterizations that are missing in top half. And then finally giving some independent impacts, which I assume is intended to make you entirely independent from opening government so that it's very clear, therefore, that you're beating them. So that sounds like a really good option for an extension. Let's hear from another group. Let's see, maybe Yusuf, could you tell me about your group?
That much, but like we also had the idea that OG and OO both like sort of just out. So from CG, Polton, and then people feel attacked, they just
astute observation that there is an implicit missing burden